used to think I didn't like to read because I was stupid. Now I realize it was a problem with my eyes. This came from a 50-year-old gentleman who'd been treated for an eye movement condition that had interfered with his reading his entire life. I sat in on this appointment, and it was one of the most inspiring things I'd ever heard, and it shaped my career and my life. I'm an optometrist, but not the type of optometrist you see to make sure that you can see clearly or check the physical health of your eyes. I'm more interested in vision development. And what I want to do today is I want to challenge your definition of vision, and I want to help you understand the impact it has on your life. So when I think of vision, or when I say vision, I'm sure most of you think of how small of a letter you can see on the chart at the end of the room, or what your prescription might be, or maybe whether your eye is healthy or not. What if I told you that seeing clearly was only one of about 17 different visual skills that are needed for an efficient and accurate visual system? These visual skills are developed over time through experience with our environment. Most of us develop these on our own when we're quite young. However, there are some children that will not develop these visual skills properly, and there are some adults or children that may lose them after a head injury, whiplash, or concussion. Let's change gears here for a second, and I want you to picture a bicycle. A broken bicycle, bent wheels, flat tires, and picture a whole bunch of children riding bicycles around a course, like a class. If there was one child on this broken bicycle, it would be easy to understand why they couldn't ride quite as quickly as the other kids. It would be easy to understand why they couldn't learn the same tricks, or perhaps even why they didn't like to ride the bike. Maybe why they came home frustrated after bike riding. We would be able to see that their performance was secondary to the state of the bicycle. So think of our visual system. It is that bicycle. Our visual system represents 70% of the incoming sensory information to your brain in everyday life. It has to do with your balance, your memory, reading and learning. Even headaches and migraines are affected by it. The tricky part here is that we don't know any experience other than what we've had visually. You can't imagine seeing the world in any other way than how you've seen it. Where that comes into play is you'll have children that will report that they see the words move on the page when they're reading. However, they don't know that that's not normal. So let's dive into a few areas of visual development. One of them, binocularity. You have two eyes in the front of your head, and they're meant to be used together. You have to keep them simultaneously lined up through all different planes of space. Your brain also has to simultaneously process the information from each channel in order to receive greater information about depth and awareness for where things are. Now, I'm sure many of you may think that an obvious problem in terms of how your eyes work together means you have one eye pointing this way and one eye pointing that way. However, sometimes the smaller inefficiencies can have an even more profound impact. There was a young boy who'd hated sports. Anything with a small flying projectile was not his thing. However, when we found out he was ignoring one eye when he was seeing in the distance, it became immediately apparent that when he was playing sports, he didn't have the same level of information as all of the other children playing. He was at a disadvantage. It made sense why he didn't like it. When he developed those visual abilities, his family was actually quite surprised to see him begin to engage in those sports because he had the abilities to do so. Another one that's actually relatively obvious and easy to understand is tracking. This is much more than just the motor movements of the eyes and how accurate those are, but your brain also actually has to use your visual information to judge where the eyes need to move to next. Gross tracking issues can impact things like sports. There was a 12-year-old girl who, after improving her gross tracking, sat there beaming because her batting average had improved from 200 to 600, all because she could actually track where that ball was in space. So there's a legal performance enhancer that won't add an asterisk next to her name. So some of you may not be sports fans and may not get that reference at all. But if you think of fine ocular motor skills and fine abilities, think of how somebody's eyes move through text when they read. This is where you may end up with a child that reads a word backwards, not because they see the word as backwards, but because their eyes hit the end of the word and then come back to the beginning of the word, and they don't even realize that's what happened. There's many parents and many tutors who will be frustrated because you can teach somebody a word in one line and 3 lines later they won't recognize the same one, all because their eyes have moved through it differently, so to them, it's basically a different word. One of the devices we use to be able to measure this is called the Readalizer or the Visiograph, and we can actually watch exactly what somebody's eyes are doing when they're reading. This comes into play for how accurately the movements are, but also are they working together efficiently and effectively. What I'm going to show you next is actually a simulation of that reading. So after taking the data, and I'm always interested in the raw data, but the program can actually spit back out the exact paragraph that person read and what their eyes did through that paragraph. So on your left here, you're going to watch a reader. She's in grade 6. She hates reading. They think she may be dyslexic or she may have attention issues because she doesn't stay focused on her reading for very long. On the right-hand side, you're going to see a normal reader. Can you see who's riding the broken bicycle? Could you imagine if I read this out loud to you in the same way that her eyes move through it? You can begin to understand where the behavior comes into that, or why she can't do it, or why she doesn't like to. The next one I'm going to show you is actually the same girl before and after her tracking abilities were treated and improved. So you'll actually notice the one on the left starts first, but the one on the right is afterwards. The interesting part from the behavior side is this is a girl who went from having tantrums every day after school because she was so frustrated by the process to doing her homework without fights because it was easy. This is a great time to talk about what happens with the information once it comes in. So we've talked a little bit about gathering it, but what happens once it's there? This is called visual processing. Just one single area of this is think about letter reversals. Is the circle on this side of the line or that side of the line? This is all about how your brain has learned to break down the visual environment around you. And it also has to do with rights and lefts. Even spelling is a visual memory task. What do you say to yourself when you see that? It looks wrong. Before we run through a few signs and symptoms and things to look out for, things to be aware of, let's go back to that behavior piece. Think of if I put you on that broken bicycle and I told you that you had to go ride the Tour de Rock or something similar. How long do you think you would last for? Would you tire out more quickly? Would you put up a fight over having to do it? Would you argue about it? So that's where it's interesting, because the next time your child fights you over doing homework, it may be the case that the fight is actually easier than the work. So that being said, let's move into a few things I want you to watch for. Double vision. Sounds like it should be pretty obvious. However, you can get cases where people just simply cover one eye when they're reading or doing things, or even turn their head. We had a young girl who played the harp instead of the piano because it was off to her side, so her nose blocked it and it wasn't double. Skipping and repeating lines when reading should be pretty obvious now. Reading with a finger or a ruler because the eyes can't keep place on their own. Slower reading or poor reading comprehension makes sense from the video. Or people that omit or insert small words when they're reading. You'll also get difficulty copying from the chalkboard if somebody loses their place. Keep in mind that not all of these symptoms need to be there, but this is just some of the areas that can be affected. Light sensitivity is one, or clumsiness is commonly seen. You're only as accurate at judging where things are around you as your visual system is at figuring that out. Avoiding sports, small flying projectiles. It's maybe some of you in here. Headaches and migraines come into it too. That is like the inefficiency of the visual system, like the grinding of the gears. It can play a role in it. We had a 60-year-old man who'd been taking Imitrex, which is a harsh migraine medication, for over 20 years. When we figured out what his visual issues were and that was treated, he'd been off Imitrex, and he hasn't had a migraine in over 2 years. Car and motion sickness is where vision ties in with vestibular, same with dizziness, nausea, and vertigo. Writing is a visual feedback loop. Letter reversals and poor spelling we talked about. Avoiding near work is part of that behavior. And difficulty paying attention to work. Think about it like an engine. If it is really inefficient, you're going to burn out of gas a lot faster, and you won't be able to sustain your attention for as long. One of the bigger red flags as well is a discrepancy between verbal abilities and somebody's reading and writing. If we look at who this actually affects, school-age children with visually related learning issues, it's up to about 25% of kids are affected to some degree. And about 80% of problem readers were found to be lacking one or more basic visual skills. So statistically, most of you sitting here will know somebody who is impacted by this. Now, these are problems with vision development, and this means that these visual skills can be developed. It takes a lot of time and effort and commitment, but it can be done. My hope is that now you can see our visual system for what it is. It is incredibly complex, and it is about so much more than just being able to see clearly. The performance of your visual system will impact every task that it is used for. The problem is, if we continue to view our visual system with the oversimplified take we have on it now, we will continue to overlook those who are struggling with reading and learning or quality of life, like the 50-year-old man whose inspiration led me here today. So please remember, your vision is so much more than just seeing clearly. Thank you.